Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be with you this morning.
Yes, it's a bleary day as we're recording this, but we hope your day is much brighter and full of joy this morning as you watch this. This is the sixth Sunday after Epiphany, the final Sunday before the transfiguration of our Lord, as we gear up for our Lenten journey. Here already. It doesn't seem possible quite yet, but it is right around the corner, and so a great day to be in the Word of the Lord as we look at the ministry of Jesus once again, continuing through on the Sermon of the Mount.
Right, and it's interesting context. I was reading something I hadn't put together. I guess I'd known it, but I never really tied it together. This is basically his first public sermon that he gives after he starts his ministry and so forth. So it's interesting that you always think about, well, when you come into a congregation, your first sermon, well, that could set the tone. Well, this one's got some serious stuff to it. So
definite law gospel usage prominent throughout his sermon here, but well, I guess before we get into that, we should pray.
You have the collect? Yeah. Well, let us pray then.
O Lord, graciously hear the prayers of your people, that we who justly suffer the consequence of our sin may be mercifully delivered by your goodness to the glory of your name. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Righty. Our first lesson for today, we head back to the book of Deuteronomy, and these words are kind of what would be understood as Moses' farewell message to the Israelites as they get ready to head into the Promised Land, a place that he will not go. So,
and it's we read, and then I'll make my comment. Makes more sense. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll pick up here at Deuteronomy chapter 30. We're going to pick up at verse 15. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today, by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways, and by keeping his commandments and his statutes and his rules, then you shall live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. But if your heart turns away, and you will not hear, but are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are going over the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, and holding fast to him. For he is your life and the length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. So far the text. You had a thought?
I find it so interesting, the pairing of this Old Testament and the Gospel. Here in the Old Testament we see Moses' final sermon, in a sense, that he gives to the people. And then in the gospel, it's the greater Moses' first sermon, and kind of picks up with the same ideas that Moses left the people with, almost to say, you didn't follow these things, and now this is where I come in. But the sermon that Moses gives here, as they're on the cusp of the Promised Land, later echoed by Moses' successor, Joshua. I think it's just such a great summation of the book of Deuteronomy as a whole, that it is literally the repetition of the law in this moment. Hey, this is what you are to do. And it seems like such an obvious choice to the hearer, that why would they ever choose something different than what the good option is?
Well, and I think there's other ways that they kind of come together, because Moses is telling them this post-deliverance. All right, they have been brought out, they have been delivered, been taught, been prepped, been brought to the very edge of starting a new life in a land that God promised them. Jesus, with the Beatitudes, is declaring them that they have been set free with the blessedness from the land of bondage. Mm-hmm. And they have a purpose in the land, now that they're free from bondage, of being the salt and the light. But what's interesting, though, is what we read in the gospel here shortly. Jesus is setting before them blessing and curse. The righteousness of the Pharisees versus the righteousness that he holds out. I find it an interesting how many ways they do kind of parallel each other in this journey. So, and again, Moses is testifying as much as anything as to the charge given him and the charge that has been done for him. And this idea of when he says he's set before them, life and good, death and evil. It's an interesting thing because throughout their journey prior to this, they had two major incidents where the blessing and the curse were radically set before their eyes. The blessing in being delivered, the curse with Korah's rebellion and with Dathan and his whole lot, questioning Moses and his leadership, or God's chosen ways of putting before them what was good and what was blessing. And it did not, and they found, they witnessed the curse. And then as they travel on further, then you begin to see what he talks about. They're drawn away to worship their bellies because they start grumbling about the meat that God is providing by the quails and the bread. And again, the curse comes in the coming of the serpents. Mm-hmm. And again, God provides deliverance by the raising up of the bronze serpent and so forth. So it's like they have been perpetually experiencing the blessing, the good, but they've also been introduced to the curse. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's like, you've lived this, this.
Right.
And so forth. And he's just desperately wanting them to, to be faithful on. But it's interesting, though, is he, in his other songs of this time and so forth, he's well aware that they will probably go the way they did before,
And, I there's that little bit that you wonder when you read this. This is the second time that the people have been on the cusp of entering the Promised Land. And, that there is that generation that was untrusting in God that died off, but there's those that were young who have been trained in the wanderings. Moses himself, he rebelled against God and would not be allowed to enter the Promised Land because he did not obey what the Lord had told him. But you kind of think, were there people who said, "Oh yeah, no, we've heard this before. Well, we're not going to get delivered this time"? Not that I think it's really a rabbit hole to go down, but you kind of wonder, okay, they've been here before, they've been on the cusp, and they've had it taken away, and I think that makes the entry into the Promised Land for them maybe a little even sweeter. That this is the fulfillment of God's promise that you will return to the land of your fathers.
Well, and the other thing that is critical to point out here is the keeping of the commandments is not, he doesn't call them to keep the commandments for their own sake, in the sense that by keeping these commandments we'll retain God's favor, we'll retain all of these things. But what he's emphasizing as having been brought out and made a separate people by the blessing of God, the living of these commandments is for the sake of your future, your neighbor, and the welfare of those in the state. Because whenever they started to punish people who had committed sins, the punishment was radical. But it was a demonstration to let everybody know, this evil this person suffered for this evil they did. Do you realize that's what you're bringing on yourself?
Right.
And so obedience isn't so I'm obeying to earn it or to maintain, but the obedience is for the welfare of the people as a whole.
Yeah, the obedience isn't a self-serving obedience, but it's an outwardly focused obedience.
Right.
Because you're not obeying for your sake, but for your neighbor's sake, for your generation's sake, for your offspring's sake, right? That you may dwell in that land and it may go well with you. Keep the commandments that I give you. And we see the varying degrees of success that the people of Israel have with that over the course of their time in the Promised Land. But
Well, and it's interesting because it's, what is it, 2 generations out from Joshua's death that it really begins to turn away. But I find it an interesting thing that, and this is where I find it echoing also in the New Testament, is you're drawn away to worship other gods and serve them. And what's fascinating in this is whatever God they turn to other than the true God will somehow allow them to avoid keeping God's commandments.
yeah,
In other words, it will allow them to become selfish and self-serving, all in the name of God. But that becomes the interesting part here, is they're drawn away, and for the most part they're drawn away to themselves, and they go searching for whatever God will satisfy their selfish desire rather than the need of their neighbor.
and where I really hear that echoed isn't just in the gospel, but in the epistle lesson as well. When Paul is stating to the Corinthians that I gave you milk when you were newborn infants, but you've never progressed past that you've never continued to grow in your faith. You've simply stayed there and have given your itchy ears to whatever suits your fancy in these squabbles. There was a phrase that I read about the Corinthians passage, and it stuck with me, was that they were throwing mud pies and playing with imaginary friends. And they had never matured beyond that level of their faith. And the people of Israel, we see how they do that, that they can claim, well, I'm doing this in the name of following the Lord, but they're not really keeping his commandments
Right.
in their truth.
Yeah, and it's really an interesting thing is this, and that's what we often forget. We tend to think of the commandments as something I have to do. Mm-hmm. Well, and why we rebel against it is because, well, I can't believe that that's in my best interest, and yet the only reason for keeping the commandments is the best interest of another.
Yeah.
And again, because sin has turned us in on ourselves, we tend to think in terms of obedience and doing anything with God is, well, what's in it for me? Well, what's in it for you is already there. That's why you're free to, worry about what's in it for somebody else. And God's saying you're the one in it. In these, and what is the summary of the commandments? But love the welfare of your neighbor, right, and so forth. But it's interesting because everything hinges upon it. Not just that they get the land, but that they're able to be fruitful and multiply, and then again the land would bless them, and everything again is treating things properly in the relationship God created between them and the land, between them and one another, and between them and God himself.
Right. It's a reminder that it's all about the relationships that God has with us and that we have with others as well. That keeping the right relationship in both the vertical and the horizontal, mm-hmm, it is the way that we live out our faith. That it's, I was looking at the verses again, and just thinking about loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, holding fast to him, for he is your life and length of days. That statement is all about the relationship that God has with us. Holding fast to him is such a great phrase, and I don't know if I fully understand the full severity of that phrase. But the beauty is that it doesn't rely on us simply holding on to God, but God holding on to us as well,
right,
and helping us to keep his commandments.
And that's why it looks deceptive in the sense here in verse 19. It says, "Therefore choose life that you and your offspring may live." And the interesting part is, it's like Well, you're not standing on a neutral fence and you're saying, well, is it life on this side or death on this side? Is it, should I turn to the blessing? Or you're in the midst of life and the blessing right now. So really the only choice you have is, do you continue? But really, at that particular point, your only choice is to leave it, because you're actually in the midst of it. So remain faithful, remain where God planted you, where he put you, and the purpose he's given you. Your only other choice is to literally, and see, that's the most beautiful part of it, they did not get the choice. God chose them,
Right.
and that's why they have life. So at that particular point, your only choice is to believe there's a better life. And again, Adam and Eve, that's what they went for, better life, because they could be like God. Yeah. And we were studying in Bible class yesterday morning how often almost every sin involves trying to obtain or gain for ourselves or do for another a better good than what God's prescription of good would be. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I had the best intentions. Well, you're right, but your best intentions do not exceed God's holy intentions.
Right.
You know,
there's a road somewhere that's paved with good intentions, but
yeah.
I, what you were discussing, it clicked in my head that this reminds me of baptism. We ask the question in our rite of holy baptism to the one coming to be baptized, do you desire to be baptized? And it is kind of that non-choice. God's promises are there in the water for them. They've been brought to the font, and their only choice is to, I guess, say no, in which case they forsake the promises.
And see, that's something a lot of people don't understand about where faith comes in. Why we say faith resides in God is because without God's invitation by promise, there is no choice. There's no opportunity. See, the fact that he offers that right away is the understanding of, if I believe that, then I'll do it. Mm-hmm. Choice isn't the key. Choice is only a consequence of receiving the promise. And so that's why when it says our faith resides in God, it isn't so that we believe in him. It's that our faith is receiving the promises that he himself gives.
Yeah.
And the thing I think that we so often disassociate is when we think, why have God's promise? Well, what is that promise? That God's gonna do. Not just God's gonna be, but God's going to be doing and keep doing and ongoing doing. So we believe in the activities of God according to his promise. Mm-hmm. And that's what Moses is kind of laying out. You have seen the activities of God. He has brought you all this way, and his activities will take you into that land and give it to you. And his activities among you will bless you. Will you live in that activity?
Right.
Not just receiving it, but being a part of that activity to your fellows or to the stranger, loving your neighbor too, and like you said, the horizontal and the vertical and the horizontal planes of our life. But interesting text. Anything else you want to pull out of there?
No, I'm sure there is, but I think for now we've tilled the soil and.
Well, the one thing to kind of keep in mind here is I like this text in the sense that it talks about us after baptism while yet in this world, because this is said to them before they cross the river. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's about how you're living now and how you're going to live then. And so when he talks about for is your life, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to give them. And it's like, it's an interesting thing of just life now and life then. Mm-hmm. It's just an interesting journey here for us. But it's God fulfilling the very promise. It was the identity that they had. Your God was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, what does that mean? Well, I believe in this God who made these promises and did these things. Well, Moses is saying, all right, he's getting ready to do more of those things. Will you continue in them? So, all Alrighty, we'll jump to Matthew. We're back in the A series and Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is on the hill. He's sit down. He's kind of northwest of the Sea of Galilee. They know pretty well where that mount was. It wasn't a huge high mount by any stretch, but it was up and away and a little bit. And he was speaking to the people. And so he picks up now, and I want to stage this because Jesus emphasized in what we last heard that our righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees, and by huge measures. If we're going to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so as he unpacks this, you're going to see this contrast between these two things. So you want to read it?
Yeah.
Matthew chapter 5, we're picking up verse 21.
You've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hells of fire. So, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Whew.
Yep.
I do think it's interesting the way that the pericope is parsed out and broken down. The tail end of last week's gospel lesson, I think, really is a nice dovetail into this. Do not think I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them.
Well, the old lectionary actually had that verse as part of the readings for this Sunday out of it, so it set the context. And one of the things that I shared with you that I, in the study that I had done, made emphasis when Jesus says, you have heard it said, he uses that numerous times with regard to anger, with regard to lust, with regard to oaths that are taken. And each one of these, when Jesus uses, you have heard it said, as opposed to it is written, which he actually says, like when he rebuked Satan in the temptations, he literally quoted scripture. But when you have this idea of you have heard it said, the authorities that I looked at, or the commentators and so forth, they seem to hold out the understanding that what Jesus was speaking of was the Pharisaical interpretations and modifications of the original law of God and so forth, to somehow allow for the not fulfilling the actual law itself and still believing yourself to be faithful or obedient. Because the one with regard, you shall not murder, okay, and yet the idea here was understood. It's certainly that comes out of the law, but they had allowed that. Well, yeah, as long as you don't murder, you could malign him, you could attack him, you could defame him, you could do all kinds of things, and so forth. Deny them good, hold this hate that this be at odds with them was okay, and you could still walk before God with all that anger and all that resentment and everything. But when Jesus points out here, that it comes down to what's happening in your heart,
Yeah.
because it's out of the heart that everything proceeds. And the other part of it is Jesus takes it from an outward observance to he focuses on the reality of the faith of the heart is involved in this. Mm-hmm. Because the one thing he talks about why is it so important is when he says, when you have your gift and you're coming to the altar, at the altar you remember. And why the altar may not seem like much, but we need to understand the altar is always understood as the place where the holy God meets wicked sinners to bring about a reconciliation and a peace. And if you're coming to that altar with your gift to be reconciled to God, mm-hmm. and you refuse to be reconciled to someone else God loves, there'll be no reconciliation with God.
Yeah, it ties in nicely. Our memory verse for the students this year or this week was, "Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner," tying into the fifth petition. And it reminds me this, what you were just saying of the parable of the unforgiving servant, that he who had been forgiven much can't forgive his brother.
Right.
And forgiveness versus anger, swap in whatever word you want, but the idea is the same, that we have been forgiven from God for the purpose of carrying that out. Mm-hmm. And if, like you said, if we can't forgive and live in relationship with the same people that bear the same image of God that we have been given.
Well, and I want to make sure we understand. I did some word study on the word reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And the reconciliation is not just that you go and surrender yourself to their terms. It's that you go and you try to entreat them to a reconciliation. Okay? And it refers to a mutual agreement that you're going to be reconciled. Now, one of the things to make sure we do is our part is to go and try and be reconciled. If they won't reconcile, then we come to the altar. The Lord knows we have. And it's something that I learned from a friend who worked through, who was an alcoholic who had walked through the AA recovery type program. And one of the things that he said is absolutely critical in the recovery as to dealing with the sense of guilt you have from all the ways you failed family and friend and so forth is you go back and you own everything you did. You don't excuse it, you don't blame it on anybody, you own it. And you tell them, you apologize, you tell them you're sorry, you ask them to forgive you, and you're promising and striving to do better. And one of the things he said, he goes, for some people, he goes, they're able to do that. For a lot, they're not. But he said, what it does is at that particular point, the alcoholic has literally debased and humbled himself before another, and confessed what they did, made no excuse, made no justification, and they're basically seeking mercy from that individual. And the interesting part is, at that particular part, whether they're merciful or not, whether they forgive you or not, the guilt is no longer on you.
Yeah.
You have handed it off to them in terms of, will you forgive it? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm guilty, but I'm not burdened by my guilt because I've owned it in front of you. If you wish to hang on to it, then that's yours. And so this reconciliation isn't that you go and make them happy. You strive to do what's right and make what's right. Like you think of Zacchaeus.
Yeah.
Everybody I've defrauded, I went and I did this and so forth. He made reconciliation with them and so forth. And that's what Jesus is trying to say is the first goal in being reconciled to somebody, if you're in the wrong, is you own it and you acknowledge it and ask them what you can do to, make things right. But if they won't be reconciled, then go back with your gift, and they must come before God at that point.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think you've gone through Ambassadors of Reconciliation as well, that they mention in this this process when you're walking through reconciliation with people. Forgiveness is the goal, but it's not always immediate. They kind of emphasize that with us as we were training to be these reconcilers, was work through and bring people to, like you said, hey, this is what I did wrong, no excuses. Can you forgive me? And forgiveness normally does come pretty quickly, because when people do that, people have mercy. I see it.
And I may have misunderstood how you said it, but the way I was taught is forgiveness may come quickly. The reconciliation is the hard part, because that's where you give yourself back up to the person who wronged you.
That's what I was trying to say, but
okay.
my brain isn't.
Right, and that is, living forgiveness is always the hard part of it.
Yeah.
And so forth. But yet what Jesus is pointing out is striving toward forgiveness or seeking forgiveness is the right thing to do. You've asked for that, you've owned that to that person, and you own it before God. If that person will not forgive you, it doesn't mean you aren't forgiven, but then they have to answer to God for why they are holding your sin, expecting God to, loose their sins when they come to the altar and stuff. So now we get into the one that's makes everybody squirm.
Yeah,
lust.
this is the
lust. He starts out with, you shall not commit adultery, which again is a biblical thing, but he's focusing on how the Pharisees, even Moses, was involved in somehow paring it down. Like, well, everybody lusts, so how can it be bad? Well, because lust literally is where you are, for lack of a better way of putting it, mentally, emotionally, and within your heart, using someone for your own pleasure apart from God's giving, apart from their permission, and so forth. And it is a very hyper selfish thing, and we think because it happens in secret, well, you can't know, and so forth. But what Jesus is saying is, in the eyes of God, standing before him, he who searches the heart, he knows it all. And so he's like, and then he starts talking these radical things. It's better, if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It's better you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown in hell, and so forth. And then he makes the same reference with regard to your right hand. What do you take away from those hyperbolic statements?
Well, I think I go back and forth on how hyperbolic it really is. I think it's hyperbolic in that we aren't supposed to walk around with one arm, but that the idea that the sin, removing what has caused you to sin, is the intent. Think about the scalpel, and it's not the hand or the eye that's necessarily the cause of the sin. It's the heart.
Right, but I do think he's using hyperbolic language. It's an argument reduced to absurdity, if you will. But see, the interesting part, what he's emphasizing here is, we try to compartmentalize sin to, well, it's just a thought.
Right.
It's not like I actually did something, or you understand what I'm saying, or and self-satisfaction is, well, that's a private thing. I just did it for myself. Yet Jesus says that you sin against yourself. That's the temple of the Holy Spirit. Why are you doing something like that? But what he's trying to point out is, what we think is a small area of sin can't affect the rest of it. And yet when he says that the entire body can be thrown into hell because of that little area, and it's not like it grows, it's just the minute it hits, the entire thing is contaminated. Yeah. It is unclean. And so I think that's what he's trying to emphasize here is that's how radically this sin needs to be avoided.
Right, and that's when I said it's the level of
No, I
hyperbole.
know,
you
you're
know,
right.
it's
I don't
the,
disagree with you at all.
You know, because you think about sin as a disease that we have been corrupted with.
Right.
If you had a limb that went gangrenous, you wouldn't hesitate to remove it.
Right.
And if you have a part of your heart that is causing you to sin, it is that severity that still applies, that it will bring about the destruction of everything.
Well, and here is why, within Lutheranism, and perhaps others may, when we make confession of sins, we acknowledge, I have sinned against you in thought, I a poor miserable sinner, have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed. What we confess is not just that we have sin in this little area. Because we have this sin in area, it's made us a sinner. It has contaminated us as a whole. So when we seek forgiveness, when we seek to be free from the power of this sin, we don't just seek the erasure of the act. We also seek the salvation of the sinner who was contaminated. Do you understand what I mean by that act? They're tied universally together and so forth.
David doesn't pray, create in me a new hand or a new eye. It's a new heart, so that he can be redeemed and saved from his sin.
And from his own heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, because that's when I always love that. He didn't ask, repair my heart, reform my heart, improve my heart.
Build upon what's already there.
God had revealed to him that his heart would retain a corruption, that any reforms, any repairs would soon give way to because I always like it. I had a guy compare when David, the illustration of David requesting a new heart, is like when if it's the repairing of the heart, so that it's healthier and it's more whole. It's like the person who has been struck blind by something that's caused them to become blind, and they go to the Lord and they get a miracle and they get their sight back. Well, that sight is temporary because they will lose their sight in death.
Right.
And that it's a temporary fix at best. It will not endure. Yet that new heart that you're referring to with David, that will endure because it's of God's heart. And so he addresses the issue of divorce, and it's one that again creates such squirming due to the fact that it is very prevalent in our society. And the most troubling thing that most people don't quite understand is, if you look at what he says here, the certificate of divorce, Moses allowed them to commit divorce because, well, your hearts are just hard. Right. Jesus even says that. Okay? But Jesus kind of cuts that out from underneath. And the critical thing that is so important in this is that divorce is wrong. Any way, every way, always, it's wrong. There's no justification that can make divorce okay. It may need to be for the welfare and the safety and the good of another. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong, that's certainly there. But it can't be, none of those things can make it sinless. Therefore, this needs the grace of God as well. Because you have to have God's forgiveness no matter the basis of divorce. And it's not like you have to come to him every day and say, okay, well, I'm still divorced and I still need forgiveness. You have to have that forgiveness as a part of your life going forward. And I'm not trying to find fault with anyone. I've got many members in my own family who are divorced. My parents were divorced, and so forth, and the like. But the problem we have, and it's what the Pharisees were always trying to do, is they were trying to make sin somehow not sin. And Jesus pointing this out is kind of emphasizing the reality that you can be divorced because of adultery. Your spouse committed adultery. But it's still a breaking of what God intended, and it needs the grace of God to heal you from it if you've been wrong. Because again, the forgiveness isn't so much a getting you off the hook for something bad that happened. It is a restoring you to wholeness yourself, if you follow what I mean by that. And that's why, don't try to make it right. Take it to the one that always makes right through repentance and forgiveness. And and that's every one of these. That's exactly the way it is. I mean, we're driven to that, and so forth. But it's one of those that it's easy to get down on people who are divorced because, well, and I've heard this. Sadly, I've had to climb a few people's trees because they were doing it. But it's the idea that, well, something must be wrong with your life that thing happened and stuff. It's like, well, yeah, maybe that's how it manifested itself, that sin's a part of their life. But, excuse me, you have sin in your life, and it manifests itself in other ways.
Yeah.
So, take the stick out of your eye before you start trying to condemn others. And then he comes to oaths. And he starts emphasizing here the idea of, you have said you shall not swear falsely, but perform to the Lord what you have sworn. Okay. And then he says, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, by Jerusalem, for it is the city greater of the great king. All right. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make your hair white. Again, this is in the Pharisaical legal structure they had created. Depending upon what you were committing yourselves to, determined on what you had to swear that you would keep that. And it again, Jesus is trying to say is the only reason you're having to swear like that is you can't be trusted. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to either prove that your yes is a good yes or it's a no. Don't swear by other things, because none of these things can change whether you're faithful or not. Yeah. And I remember when, because I don't know, I could still be considered that. I was a great practical joker. I could string people along and anything else and just create. I was in college and seminary. I could do that, and I loved to do that. But when it came to a serious thing, and they were like, how can I know that you're not, stringing along here? And I said, here's the thing. And I said, this is the way you'll know. I give you my word. If I give you my word, you know what I'm telling you straight. And it got to where, with some of these guys, and he says, okay, so can I believe? I said, I give you my word. And they'll go, yeah, okay, I'll take it. And that's kind of what he's saying here, is that, and you teach people to know your yes and your no's, and so forth. But it's kind of like, what do you do with the line like, well, good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, Yeah. But it's and that's kind of reminds me of the difference. I don't know. You may have seen books like that, but you certainly weren't raised with the shalls so much in the Word of God, were you?
No.
As King James kind of.
No, not so much. The thys and thine in the Lord's Prayer for sure stayed,
But one of the things the old King James always had in it is it had shall, but it also had the word will. And when the NIV and the more modern translation came out, they substituted will for all the places of shall. And one of the things to understand the difference between I will do something and I shall do something. When I say I will do something, I'm saying I will do this if nothing interferes with it. But if I say I shall do this, I'm saying this will be done because I will not let anything interfere with it. So when you think of the Lord, you see that especially in the Lord shall and so forth. It's emphasizing what will happen. Nothing can stop it. But wherever you see will, it's like, yes, I'm planning to do it as long as nothing interferes. One provides for the potential that something might interfere with it. But shall is a definitive statement that I won't let anything interfere. Yeah. And that's our hope that we do when he says, you shall not murder. There's no excuse for murder. You understand what I'm saying? All of those things that, because he has in here, like, you shall not swear falsely, okay? And he even uses the word, they have it here too, you shall not commit adultery. He's literally saying there's no excuse for it, and so forth. But it's one of those things, when we hear it, we don't tend to quite get a hold of it. But what's so beautiful is when that shall is associated with, and I love it, especially at the end of the 23rd Psalm. I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Not unless somebody fit it, but no, because he prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemy. And it's such beautiful language. But the thing Jesus does here is he again sets before them curse and blessing. Yeah. The problem we have is, you and I talked about this yesterday, you were discussing this, is we cannot be so obedient, we cannot so keep these commandments that we somehow may obtain the kingdom of God, and so forth. And again, born out of Jesus isn't telling us the right thing to do in order to earn heaven. He's telling us the right thing to do so as to be salt and light, as people who live by kingdom values,
Not doing this because it'll earn you salvation, but because you are saved.
Right. And the world needs this kind of commitment. They need the simple ability to have somebody to trust in without 85 pages of oaths on this, that, or the other. And so it's really a glorious passage if we hear it the right way. Don't trust in it that you're going to obtain heaven or God's approval. Trust in it because it's the way you're going to salt somebody's life with what is good, or you're going to shine light in their darkness, and so forth. So, but do you know which one you're preaching on?
I'm actually going Corinthians.
Oh, you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a complete curveball off of everything today, but I think there's some good interplay between the three texts that I'm kind of trying to interweave all of them, but focuses on Corinthians and Paul's encouragement, not only to crave the pure spiritual food, but to realize that it's done to you, not by our own doing, or even our doing as pastors, but that God is the one who does all of this.
And and the interesting thing for the spiritual food, it's the whole idea that to be living is to live off of what is outside you. Yeah. And so forth. And the thing I always remember that I thought was a fascinating thing is some of you farmers out there, but when my first two congregations, I was in big farming country and stuff, and one of the things I always thought was interesting is they put anhydrous ammonia. So they'd plant the corn and so forth, and they would go through and they would have these things going through the ground that would literally go down to the ground, and it would spray this anhydrous ammonia gas into the soil. And it literally allowed and made the soil in such a way that when the corn grew, rather than growing up a limeish yellowish green, it gave it the rich greenness and the fullness of the flavor to the corn and so forth. And I always think that, what Paul's talking about here is you're wanting and forgive me, I'm getting deep into fertilizer, but like what is the, oh my gosh, my mind's, the spray on.
Miracle Grow.
Miracle Grow. See, what people don't get, Miracle Grow, that fertilizes through the leaves, not the ground.
Right.
And a lot of people, when they think that's what they're wanting, they're just wanting to have a little splashed on them, the spiritual milk. Mm-hmm. But see, what he's saying here is that deeper stuff is your roots have to dig down. You need to be putting the word where those roots are, right, and stuff. So it's just interesting illustration for that. But yeah, I enjoy my gardening and stuff like that. But the anhydrous, I learned how it worked, and we had one Mark Krause. He was in my second congregation. He was out doing it, and the hose burst that was attached to the tank, And fortunately, they turned around and they had those things so they'd shoot straight up rather than forward or back. And when it blew, he shut the tractor off and ran from it, and he was okay. But I think it was like a month before, or about 2 weeks before, a gentleman had been doing that, and he didn't get away from it. It killed him. But at any rate, enough of the fertilizer stuff. But I'm probably going to work with the gospel.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to get at it, but it's just, and why I find this so prevalent today is a lot of people in their walk of faith, in their journey as the people of God, very easily are drawn to listen to somewhere it was said, in some shallow, whatever it is that allows you to be comforted and assured by something other than Christ, or it makes what you're doing sinfully permissible.
Right.
It allows you to think about yourself and stuff. So that's kind of where I'm headed with that. One thing we're going to be offering this week is setting up for Ash Wednesday and our journey through Lent. That begins a week from this Wednesday on the 22nd. We always do a devotional that accompanies our journey. And this year our Lenten journey is focusing on the essentials of faith. And we're looking at the essentials of faith based on the 6 chief parts of the Catechism. Well, one of the things that we've put together is a reading guide through limited sections of each of the parts of the Catechism, like each commandment and so forth and so on, over from Ash Wednesday to Easter Sunday, based on the new 2017 Catechism. And we have that. The guide's free. The catechisms, they're normally $20. We have them available for $10 a piece. If you aren't here and you'd like a copy, just contact the church office. But you'll get the guide, and it's a beautiful way to it'll track what we're doing on our midweek Lenten services of walking through the catechism. And the catechism is just an instruction on the chief teachings of God,
Right.
of what His law is, who is God as He's revealed as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, what is the conversation gift we're given in prayer according to the Lord's Prayer, and then the blessings of living our life in baptism, in confession and forgiveness, and of course nourishing in the Lord's Supper. So if you'd like a copy of that, contact the church office, let us know. Again, they're $10 for a copy. When I was in St. Louis a couple of weeks ago, I got them, and we got a couple of Thriving gift cards to help knock down the price. But we also, the lady told me would have been about $284 to ship it. And when I was down for my brother-in-law's ordination, I picked him up there and hauled them back. So, but anything else going? We do not have the chili cook-off.
Yes.
That has been postponed just due that we did not have enough chilies to make a go of it. So hopefully, maybe just a hint that something might happen around Cinco de Mayo.
That's what I think I've been hearing. So.
We might be able to do something quite like that. So
have to modify my chili recipe to be more thematic. But,
well, I'll make carnitas chili. So But anything else you can think of?
No, I think that's all I've got.
Okay. Pastor Clemola's Bible class is tomorrow night. To catch him and Pastor Mapus on What Does the Bible Say? And we have Wednesday morning Bible class in Hebrews. You're going to be leading that for us this week as I'm out of town for a few days. But beyond that, we do have the following Saturday is the men's breakfast Bible study at 8 in the Luther Room.
Yeah. I think that's all that we've got. Have a great week. Go in peace and serve the Lord.
God bless and keep you.